Imagine you're sitting on a plane. It's late at night. Everything feels normal. People are dozing off, some staring blankly at the dark sky outside. And then, without a single warning, the systems begin shutting down. One by one, the lights vanish. The radio goes silent. And in that moment, at 35,000 feet above an endless jungle, you realize that no one is coming to help you. That's exactly what happened to Flight 967. The Boeing 747 looked completely ordinary as it rolled down the runway at Los Angeles International Airport that night. All 165 passengers on board thought this was just another flight. Some were traveling for work. Some were going home to their families. None of them had any idea that this journey was about to change everything. In the cockpit, Captain Daniel Reeves and co-pilot Marcus Cole were running through their final checks. Every reading was normal, every system green, and that, as it turns out, was the most dangerous part because the biggest threats often hide behind the illusion of everything being fine. At 11:02 p.m., the plane lifted off. The first few hours were peaceful. Passengers slept. Flight attendants moved quietly through the aisles. Outside, there was only darkness and the occasional distant flicker of lightning that nobody thought to worry about. Then, at cruising altitude, a faint vibration moved through the cockpit. What seemed like routine turbulence quickly turned into something else entirely. The compass needle began spinning without reason. The instruments started giving strange readings. And before either pilot could make sense of it, a bolt of lightning struck so close that the entire cockpit flooded white and then went completely dark. The screens died. The radio cut out. Flight 967 had just been erased from the world. Captain Reeves grabbed manual control immediately, but the autopilot was gone. The navigation system was useless, and the plane had begun to sway, each movement more violent than the last. In the cabin, people were screaming, praying, clutching whoever was next to them. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and final. Asterisk, brace for impact. Asterisk below them was nothing but thick, black jungle. At 3:45 a.m., the aircraft clipped the treetops and tore through the canopy. The wings shredded. The fuselage split into pieces across the forest floor. But the dense layers of trees had slowed the descent just enough, and because the fuel tanks were nearly empty, there was no fire. That single fact saved dozens of lives. When the first light of morning crept through the canopy, 118 people were still alive. Captain Reeves, bleeding from a deep cut on his forehead but still standing, looked at what remained: broken metal, scattered belongings, and people in shock, and understood immediately. This wasn't the end of a crash. This was the beginning of something far harder. He organized the survivors into 3 groups. One to build shelter, one to care for the injured, one to search for food and water. The jungle around them was not a backdrop, it was an active threat. Every leaf, every sound, every shadow carried risk. Food ran out within days. They turned to whatever the jungle offered: wild fruit, insects, small birds, fish from a nearby river. But the river water, though it looked clean, carried parasites that tore through weakened bodies. Fever, infection, and dysentery spread quickly. Wounds that would have healed in a week began rotting in the humidity. People stopped sleeping. People started dying, not from the crash but from what came after. Through it all, Captain Reeves kept them moving. He organized the construction of a massive SOS signal on the ground using wreckage, clothing, and timber. He kept people working because he knew that the moment they stopped, the moment hope died, the jungle would finish what the crash had started. But the sky never answered. By day 120, barely 60 survivors remained. Then the rains came. Not for hours, for days. The camp flooded. The shelters collapsed. And with the rising water came a new threat. Crocodiles, pushing into their territory, glowing eyes visible in the dark, just beyond the firelight. Reeves made the call to move everything off the ground, building elevated platforms from salvaged wreckage. It bought them safety from the crocodiles, but cost them comfort, rest, and the last reserves of their strength. Then came the moment that defined everything. The food was completely gone. People could barely stand. And Reeves made a decision that was as desperate as it was necessary. They would hunt a crocodile. They fashioned spears from wood and metal scraps. Reeves himself stood at the water's edge as bait while the others waited in the brush. The water stirred. A massive crocodile moved toward him. As it lunged, the group erupted from the trees and drove their weapons in with everything they had left. They killed it. But Reeves had been badly injured in the attack. The wounds were deep, the blood loss severe. Despite everything the survivors tried, he died within hours. The man who had held them together through 140 days of hell was gone. The silence that followed was unlike anything they had felt before. It was a woman named Sarah, an ordinary passenger when the journey began, who stepped forward. She gathered what remained of the group, looked them each in the eye, and said what all of them already knew but were afraid to say. Staying here is just a slower way to die. If we want to live, we have to walk out. By this point, only 35 people were still alive. Many were too weak to move. In the end, a group of 20 set out together, those who could still walk, those who refused to let go. They moved east, using the sun as their only compass, cutting through dense undergrowth with bleeding hands. On the second day, they reached a fast-moving river with crocodiles visible beneath the surface. Sarah improvised a rope bridge from vines and timber. One by one, barely breathing, they crossed. On the fourth day, exhausted beyond description, they climbed a ridge. From the top, far in the distance, Sarah spotted something in the river below. A plastic bottle. A small, meaningless piece of garbage, and the most beautiful thing any of them had ever seen. Proof that other human beings existed somewhere downstream. They walked toward it. Days later, they found a wooden boat on the riverbank. Two local woodcutters stared at the figures emerging from the trees, hollow-eyed, barely recognizable as human. Sarah gestured, stumbled through broken words, and slowly the men understood. They loaded the survivors into the boat and took them downriver. After 437 days, 26 people came out of that jungle alive. When the news reached the world, people couldn't believe it. These were men and women who had been declared dead months earlier, now walking back into the lives of families who had already begun grieving. No words were needed at those reunions. 437 days of fear, hunger, and fighting was written clearly enough in their faces. The government later admitted that the search had been called off too soon. But none of that mattered to the people who made it back, because they weren't just survivors. They were proof that the human will, when pushed past every limit, can still find a way through. The jungle tried everything: hunger, disease, darkness, loneliness. In the end, they won.